This week on Latinx Mentor, we welcome Julián Castro. After graduating from Harvard Law School, Castro returned to his native San Antonio to begin his political career. In 2001, he became the youngest city council member in the city's history, and in 2009, he was elected as mayor. In 2014, he accepted a cabinet position as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Barack Obama. Thank you for joining us today with Latinx Mentor. We have our guest here, Mr. Julián Castro. Very impressive. You were a former city councilman and mayor of San Antonio, and you also were HUD secretary under President Obama. And I know that you had been considered for vice president with Clinton. So very, very impressive, and very happy to have you here with us to speak about mentorship and, how our audience can possibly get to a place where you are now.
Thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to be with y'all.
We appreciate you. One of the things that, I think we didn't mention is that you actually were a presidential candidate in 2019, which is amazing, to jump into that world. And we're going to talk about all the great things you've done. But one of the things that I think our audience really would benefit from is not where you're at right now, but kind of where you came from. Because a lot of, I think, kids watching us right now are probably kids that come from a very similar background as you. So kind of with that, we both have read your book. We've read a lot about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your story starting with your grandma coming over and then your mom and that life that may resonate with some of our audience?
Yeah, I think I grew up like a lot of folks here in our hometown of San Antonio. I have a twin brother, Joaquin, and Joaquin and I grew up on the west side of the city there off of Guadalupe Street mostly with my mom and my grandmother. My parents split up when we were about 8, and my grandmother had come from northern Mexico when she was about 6 or 7 years old because her parents had passed away and her nearest relatives lived here in San Antonio. They brought her over here, really, took her out of a bad situation there, raised her, but she never finished elementary school even. So she worked her entire life as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter. And she raised my mother as a single parent. And my mom was able to graduate from high school and actually go on to college, the first in her family to do that.
Our Lady of the Lake, right?
She went to Our Lady of the Lake, yeah. During that time, she became really involved politically. She joined the Young Democrats, got involved in, being a part of local campaigns, and really got bitten by the political bug.
And she took you guys along with her, right?
Yeah, a few years later when we were born, she would drag us to rallies and speeches and 3-hour-long political meetings. And so I thought it was totally boring back then.
Yeah.
If you had asked me when I was a teenager, did I think that I would go into politics? I would have said, no.
Not just
no
no.
way.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I mean, I just thought that it was boring because I'd been dragged to these things as a kid by my mom. But we grew up though in this household with 2 women who loved us a lot and who sacrificed, like a lot of parents and grandparents do, a lot.
My understanding is it's a very humble house on the west side of San Antonio, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we were at times lower income, at other times lower middle income. We moved from basically one part of the west side to another part of the west side and started off school in Edgewood and then went to SAISD and eventually went to Tafoya Middle School and then Jefferson High School and then were fortunate enough to get to go away to college and law school.
And one thing I want to bring up is I know during reading your book, what I really, really admired about your mom and her way of raising you guys was she really listened to what you had to say. And she taught you that your opinion matters and that if you can articulate what you have to say, like when you wanted to switch schools, a few times in high school, if you can make your case and use logic, okay, then she's not going to argue with you,
Yeah, my mom had grown up in a household where there was a lot of love for sure, but they also had, I think, this sort of sense of the kids stay in their place. Disciplinarian and so forth. And so my mom kind of rebelled against that. And it was in keeping also with her general philosophy and her politics. And she did the opposite with Joaquin and me, encouraging us to give our opinion and to stay current with what was happening out there in the world and also other stuff. I mean, she was just very, she was very liberal, not only in the political sense, but also like we would go watch horror movies by ourselves when we were like 10 or 11 years old, take the bus downtown to the old Aztec Theater here. She didn't put a lot of restrictions on us. And I know that, every parent is different. That's not for everybody. But for us, it ended up working well. And what we got out of that was a sense that we were loved and a sense of self-confidence and a belief that we could go and achieve things.
I was going to say just real quick for some parents, young parents that may be watching, and they say, hey, I want my kid to turn out like that. I want my kid to turn out like Dulce. One of the things that I think is important in the message that you're giving is if you can allow your kids to have their own voice and not per se baby them so much, right? You went to
control them.
Control them. You went to public school all your life here in San Antonio, and unfortunately, probably not some of the best public schools out there.
Sure.
I went to public school as well, so you don't have to send your kids to private school to have success. In other words, for a lot of young kids that maybe think I have to work so hard to make so much money because my kids, I have to give them the advantages that I didn't have. And some of them may think that private school is that advantage. A lot of times it seems like maybe just giving your kids a voice, giving them the ability
what
to
you
debate.
can, what you're able to give them. Because, if not everybody's able to give their kids private school, of course, private school it offers that leg up. And when you were attending your Ivy League schools, you kind of saw that some of your colleagues had that leg up that you didn't have. That doesn't mean that you both were not able to achieve the same thing. So you give your kids what you can.
I think what's most important for, and I see this now as a parent, is for parents to be involved in their child's education and to help them along, to support them. Not everybody is going to be able to afford the best education out there. We certainly weren't, like a lot of families, we were not able to, but we made the most of our experience there in the public schools. And we did have a lot of great teachers that encouraged us and helped us along the way. And my mother, she became part of the PTA, I remember, when we were in elementary school, because she was like the first or second parent to show up to the meeting. And she was a fierce advocate for us. And so my hope is that parents will be as involved as possible in their child's upbringing. For the kid, just because your family doesn't make that much money does not say anything about your brains or your talent, your ability, your potential. I saw that very clearly when I, both in school here and then when I went away to college and law school, that there were a lot of people that had come from lower income backgrounds, and because of that, they were hungrier.
Yeah.
They wanted even more to achieve. And there were also people who had come from affluent backgrounds that were kind of coasting because, they had what they had.
It was a given for them.
And also, and it went both ways. I mean, there were people on either side of that. Your destiny is not determined by just how much money your family makes. Don't let it discourage you from reaching as high as you can in your life.
And I think if you have kids at a young age, instead of making your life around your kids and everything's about them, it's okay to take them to the school with you. It's okay to have them sitting there bored. You have your son here at this podcast, and I
He's
love
a little
it.
bit bored right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's bored. I've got my daughter, and the same. We took them everywhere, brought them everywhere, and they may be bored to death, but they're absorbing, right? And they're watching and they're looking. And a lot of times, kids will do what they see, not what you tell them.
Yeah, no, my mom took us to UTSA. And this is when UTSA didn't have a downtown campus. It was the main campus. And we would take I can't remember whether it's one or two buses. We didn't have a car at that time, but we would go with her when she was getting her master's degree in the early 1980s in environmental science. And also she was interning and then working at the city of San Antonio in the personnel department. And so I know that all of that is easier said than done. But for parents, don't be afraid to, expose your kids to all of that so that they see what's possible. That's what my mom did.
And I think that that's really important. Number one, because there's this big discourse now that representation matters. And I think that's kind of the basis of this podcast even. But what you kind of don't realize is when you're taking your kids to, when they're watching you work hard and achieve, you're that representation there. They're thinking
For them.
Yes. So they're
Sure.
thinking, I saw my parents working hard and achieving, and I'm thinking, okay, I can do that. These are my parents. I'm them,
That's not that smart. That's just thinking.
No, not at all. But I'm thinking like, okay, it's possible. It's not out of the realm of possibilities, you know?
And how do you address a lot of parents think that their kids are going to resent them because they didn't let them be children. They're being dragged. I mean, do you feel that way?
I
I know we drug you
yeah.
everywhere.
No, I don't. But I think I am a little bit different. I might not have the same perspective as everybody because I have that ambition and I have that work ethic and that drive. And so I understand. And I think, if ever I were to have kids, I would want them to be understanding as well. And I would be dragging them around everywhere. So I have that understanding. Some kids might not, and that's okay. You can't really control what somebody else does. You have to make the best impact that you can on your kids, I think.
For you being drugged around, you and your brother, did you ever feel like resentful? Man, why am I? It's not my political party. It's not my deal.
I'm sure in the moment when I was 10 or 11 or 12, I didn't like it, but it wasn't anything major. I mean, and when you're a kid, you sort of roll with a lot of things.
Yeah.
I see that in my kids, seen that, in many other kids. And I feel like that was the case for Joaquin and me. What all of that gave to my brother and me was ultimately this sense that we could be a part of the world around us and make an impact in it, and that we should find a way to not just do something for ourselves, but to, in our career, do something for other people. And of course, later, for me, public service would be that way that I did that. There are a lot of different ways to do that, whether you're in the private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector. But for me, it was public service. And that was inspired by my mom, for sure.
I do really want to touch on another message that we could be giving, because I think this isn't talked about very much, but I think it should be. You, to my understanding, waited until you were established before starting your family. You had a house, you had graduated from law school, you had a high-paying job at the time, which was really great. And so you knew what you wanted to do, you had worked to get there, and you then decided, okay, now is a good time for me to start my family. So, they were not being dragged to, and not that it's bad, but that you're not having to worry about how are my kids going to be taken care of while I'm trying to get through school, while I'm trying to, take care of my mortgage and I have all my student loans and all of this stuff, So I think that's an important message too.
It really makes it easier when you have that kind of stability, compared to other situations where someone may be a lot younger. Let's face it, in our community, even though we've seen the rate of teenage pregnancy go down a lot in recent years, San Antonio still has one of the higher rates. And my message to, somebody that's 20, 21, or whatever their age is, who finds themselves a parent and didn't expect that, is you still have a lot of your life left to live. And yes, it's harder, it's challenging. Oftentimes they rely on their parents or others to help be providers, but don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on yourself. And also what you do, as you mentioned, you're a role model for your son or daughter, and it sets an example. And so you still have a very powerful example to set for your son or daughter that you love, that you want to make sure they go even further than you can.
Yeah. And the reason I was really bringing that up is because I know for me, having conversations with some of my, classmates or friends, there's still in this generation a lot of kids that, and we're not kids, we're adults, young adults that think, it's time, I have to get married and I have to have my kids, and I don't want to be 30 and having kids. And so for me, my mindset is 30's young still,
Well, and that's a trend that we see in these this younger generation. People are waiting longer to get married, waiting longer to start a family, also waiting longer to buy a house. Even there's less car purchases. It's, the people have changed with the times, and in some ways that gives folks more flexibility, more latitude, right? Because especially in our Mexican American culture, and like a lot of cultures here in the country and otherwise, like there was this expectation a lot of times that, especially on women, oh, why are you not married? Why have you not started a family by the time you're 25 or even younger than that before? And I think it's good that people have more latitude now, more flexibility.
I agree.
So how do you kind of going through your life, right? You get through high school, you and your brother both decide to go to Stanford undergrad. Can you explain that? How do you get there from Jefferson High School to say, I think I can go to Stanford undergrad? That's a pretty big jump, and it's an expensive jump, and it's a big move all the way to California. How was your mindset around that time? You had to have been 17, 18 when you made that decision.
I mean, for me, it was just this sense that I was going to try and reach for the best place out there when it came to applying for college. And so Joaquin and I just got that U.S. News and World Report book that they still put out every year, or magazine, on the rankings of colleges. And we applied to like the top 10 or 11 of them. And in addition to Trinity here and UT, and it was just this sense of going for it, basically. And what I found is that not only in that situation, but in other situations in life, that really is the best thing that you can do, because the worst thing that could happen is that
they say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there were people. I didn't graduate as the valedictorian in my class. Right? I mean, I was up there, but I wasn't the valedictorian. And I'm sure somebody had a higher SAT score than I did at the school. But some of the folks who fit that category did not even apply to those schools. So people are writing themselves out of opportunity that, who knows, if it had been, one of my classmates that, had a higher grade or had a higher SAT score, it may have been them that went to Stanford and Harvard.
I've told my kids this story. When I was at UT Austin, I used to work at Budget Rent-A-Car, and I'd have these conversations with this older man, and he would always tell me, you should be at Harvard. You should be at these schools. And it was before the internet, believe it or not, kids. Mm-hmm. And I remember that I told him, I don't even know where Harvard is. And I didn't know where Harvard was. And one day I walk in my little inbox, he had put an application to Harvard. And he said, I called, I ordered an application for you, fill it out, send it in. And he even said, I'll pay the application fee for you. And I took it home and I thought about it. And I was so scared. I didn't believe in myself. I couldn't do it. I didn't know how I would get there, that I never sent in the application. And that's one of the biggest regrets I have, which is kind of what you're talking about. What's the difference? What's the difference? You were 17, 18, and you said, man, I'm going to go for it and I'm going to figure it out. I was too scared. I didn't believe enough in myself to even apply.
Well, that's the thing. It's not a difference in talent or intelligence or ability, because, there are people that are going to any number of places when we talk about higher education I saw very clearly that my classmates had the same ability as people sitting in those classrooms at Palo Alto or in Cambridge. And Joaquin has said the same thing many times. I don't know. I mean, people for different reasons. Some folks want to stay closer to home because they really want to be close to their family. A lot of folks worry about the financial aid aspect of it. We were fortunate that we were able to get good financial aid from those schools, but I've noticed that some folks don't even get into that because they have this sense that money is not going to be there. And I don't blame them for worrying, but I would say, yes, it'll be there. You can find a way to do it, if you get in.
And I guess there's many ways to success, but for young kids that are watching that are smart enough, have the talent, have the drive, but maybe don't have the financial resources, maybe don't have the family backing. They're scared, they're afraid. I guess the message really is just do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. You'll figure it out once you get in.
Go for it.
Just go for it.
That's our family motto. My grandma was a very, very tough woman, and she did a lot. She was very strong, and she taught us, you just figure it out. You figure it out. Whatever it is, you figure it out.
Yeah. No matter what you're getting, you figure it out. Once you get there, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. But I will say, going through that process, I just recently was applying to grad school. And even back when I was applying to colleges, it's tough. It's really, really, really tough to believe in yourself like that. And to even, I mean, rejection's hard. It's hard. And so to be sending those applications out and trying to give yourself that chance, you have to recognize that's very difficult. But I think if you're not going to believe in yourself, who is, you know? And so if you're telling yourself already, there's zero chance that I will get into this school, I think that's more detrimental than hearing back from this school that you might not have been a good fit.
And there may be 10 no's, but if there's just one yes,
that's
all you need.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Right?
You know, and I also think nobody likes failure or defeat, but you do learn things from that. When I ran for mayor the first time, I lost that race, and I found that it was true that you definitely learn more when you lose. If you have pride in what you do, it forces you to think about how you can improve and do better.
That's a great point. You know, like how do you overcome those obstacles of immediate failures, today's failure? And that's one of the things we talked about. You discuss in your book a lot, and when you lost your first mayoral bid, and I think it was by 4,000 votes, right?
Something like that.
Yeah,
you're
like so close, yet so far.
You're like, oh, that number hasn't haunted me in a long time.
It was a close runoff. I think lost by a couple of points, and that's the first time I felt like, in my career at least, things definitely didn't go the way that I planned or wanted to. But it forces you to think about, do you really want something, and why are you doing it? And are you willing to risk failure again? And in elections, in some ways, getting defeated or losing in politics is different from other kinds of failure in the sense that it's very public.
Yeah.
And the people that you see at the grocery store or whatever, you know that those folks said, no, we don't want you, we want somebody else. And so it's also kind of a more personal rejection in some ways. But it's like anything else. I mean, this is not something that you can't overcome and can't get over.
But kids that maybe applied to the school of their dream, the school of their choice, and they got that no, may feel like, well, that school doesn't want me. Probably very similar to what you felt. Well, maybe this town doesn't want me, or these people don't want me. What message would you have for them? Like, how did you overcome that and get back on that horse? And, you know,
I mean, I would say there's a reason that you are where you are, that you've had the success that you've had. And to keep believing in yourself and keep doing what has made you successful in school already, in high school and so forth. And especially when it comes to college, colleges make decisions on admission for all types of different reasons. They're filling out a class that is composed, in different ways. And they have way more people who apply who are very, very qualified than they can actually take in. And so it's not a personal statement about anybody's ability. The other thing I would say is, if you count up all the people that are successful and how they're successful, there are a lot more people probably that have come from schools that folks may not think of as, that's my first choice school, that have done great things and been successful than there are, of these other schools. So just remember that you're not defined by the title in front of your name or where you're going to school or anything like that. It all has to do with you and who you are and your intelligence and your talent, your ability. As long as you have that,
what about
you can succeed.
Work ethic, because I read a book, right, and it said if smarts was all it took, then every valedictorian would be running the world, right? Every number one in their class would be running the world, and obviously that's not true. And so I've met a lot of people that are super smart, super talented, but maybe they just don't have either that ambition, the drive, the work ethic. They'd rather go home and watch Netflix than, stay reading or learning or whatever. What do you think is that trigger, right? Why would you go home and read a book versus go home and watch Netflix and relax?
I mean, that's so true. A lot of it is work ethic, and as many people have pointed out, so much of it is work ethic. People that may not have the highest test scores, or somebody would say, oh, I find this other person to be so much more sharp. But if somebody works at it and works at it and works at it and thinks about what they're doing as well, that is so powerful to success. And then it's all of these other things, right? Your attitude and how you are with people, your ability to network, all of those things that go into success. I mean, but work ethic is one of the most important. If you don't have a good work ethic, there's only so far that you can skate along on, whether it's your intelligence or your connections or anything else.
Yeah. And I think a good thing to point out to our viewers that might still be in high school or in college, I'm the first to admit, I am not the smartest person in the world. I don't think that intelligence came naturally to me. I struggled in high school, and in high school, I didn't understand yet that work ethic is what matters. I just thought, I get by. So with my smarts, and so I'm not the smartest person, but I get by, and that's okay. And when I got to college, because I had been rejected from the schools that I really wanted to go to, I realized, okay, no, something's got to change. And that's when I learned that lesson of that work ethic, that message about work ethic applies to school too. You don't have to be the smartest to get the highest scores in school. You have to work hard. And I, studying, pulling all-nighters, right into an exam, you do what you can to what works for you, but you have to work hard. You have to work really hard. It's
in
not all
addition
about
to that,
smarts.
how would you say that the people you surround yourself with affect kind of your trajectory in life? Because you talked about networking, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, all of that matters from the very beginning in your upbringing. In my book, I wrote about going to middle school orientation and my mother being there with Joaquin and me. And one of the teachers or administrators at Rhodes Middle School in SAISD telling us to look around the room, the students, because the chances were that up to half of us might not be there when it was time to graduate from 8th grade.
Wow.
And later on that day, she pulled us out of that school and put us in Tafoya Middle School. And she said later that she wouldn't have her boys anywhere where people didn't even believe that you could finish 8th grade. You need to surround yourself with people who love you, who believe in you, oftentimes who believe in you more than you even believe in yourself.
Yeah.
But also, I think especially people from an older generation that have some wisdom to see the road ahead.
Some mentors.
Yeah, mentors, of course. Yeah, no, that's why I think it's very helpful. And it's helpful to find those people in your life. Oftentimes they're parents, but not only parents.
Yeah.
And then with your peers, to be able to have good friendships and relationships that can be supportive. And then with networking with colleagues, it makes a difference. Like, we all wish that we weren't in a society where it doesn't matter who you know, it's only what you know. But the truth is that who you know often does to open up opportunities that might not be there if you don't have those connections. And I would say to people, make the most of that, in an honest way, in a genuine way, but make the most of it in your career.
One of the things that, obviously touching on mentorship, I remember when I went to school, my dad was a construction worker, my mom was a housewife, 5th grade education from elementary school. So there was so many situations where I couldn't go to my parents because all they're going to tell me is, Mijo, I'll pray for you. They didn't have real world advice because they hadn't lived that world. And I imagine when you went to Stanford and then on to Harvard Law School, it's not like you can go back to your mom or your grandma and say, hey, Mom, how do I deal with this professor in law school that's whatever, or this other person or whatever, how did you kind of tackle that? Did you find mentors, friends? How did you tackle that?
I think a combination of friends. It really helped for me. I feel like I was lucky and different from most cases because I got to go to college and to law school with my twin brother, who was also my best friend.
So you have a built-in support.
Yeah, most people don't have that. When we went off to Stanford, we had never seen the campus. It was only our second time on an airplane. We cried all the way to El Paso. My dad had bought the worst tickets on Southwest Airlines. I think we stopped in El Paso, San Diego, and then into San Francisco. But we were sad leaving home. that meant we had to find a support system. It was the two of us mostly, but then, at Stanford, there was a professor named Luis Fraga, who was originally from Corpus and had done a lot of work on Mexican-American politics and some work on Texas politics, and became our thesis advisor and a friend over the years. So there have been people along the way that have been very helpful and helped us navigate those situations where we were unfamiliar. The other thing is, today, young people have so many more resources on the internet and apps and other ways. This isn't as good, I think, as having a human being that you're close to, but it's so much more helpful and provides so much more information, than a lot of us had, at least the same amount. We didn't have the same amount when we were going through there.
She comes up with some great ideas. I'm like, where'd you learn that? Instagram.
Yeah, no, but you have to use what you can. You don't always have the top choice, in front of you. And so you use what you can and you get by. And you don't just get by, you succeed and you work hard. But I did want to bring up, when you went to Stanford and then to Harvard even, you, previous to that, you had been very close to your mom and to your grandmother, and you lived in the same house with them. You shared a room even with your brother and your grandmother. It's hard leaving your family. It's really hard. How do you do that? And what kind of advice can you give to kids that, that is their reason for not wanting to go far away to school, is because how am I going to leave my family?
It was very hard. We had never really spent time away from home. 5 weeks after we got there, we took a flight back to San Antonio and showed up at my mom's doorstep, like, I don't know, at 10 o'clock at night. We had flown in. And she was probably scared to death because she thought we had quit school or something. It gets better. You make friends where you're at, and you get more used to, in this case, our college that we were at. And by the time my second and third year there came around, I felt just as at home, almost just as at home there as I did actually back in San Antonio. And so I would say to both parents who oftentimes want to keep their kids, I understand that as a parent myself now, like you want to keep your kids safe and near you, but also to students, reach for as high as you can get. Let your talent and your ability, your work ethic take you as high as you can get. And especially these days, where it's so easy to keep in touch with people. There's no more like 20 cents for 1 minute of long distance.
You have to have the long distance phone cards.
The rates were ridiculous back then, Now, like
Zoom, FaceTime
all the time, or Zoom or whatever it is. It's so easy to be in touch and to maintain those bonds with family and with friends back home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that should not be an obstacle, in other words, whenever you go off.
That's right.
Yes. It can seem like a big obstacle, but it's not in reality, I think. Maybe the message.
So kind of with that message, you went to Stanford, you go to Harvard. I imagine that based on your background, you were the first in the room in a lot of scenarios. And then if you go forward to being mayor, to city council, to going to a big defense firm, making Gump, and then even the White House, some great achievements you've had. I would imagine there's many times you've been, as a person of color, the first in the room. So I know we talk a lot about imposter syndrome when it comes to women, and that's a very big discourse in amongst women. But that is also a discussion that I think should be had as a person of color. There's many times you're going to walk into a room and you may be the first person in that room of color. Has that happened to you, and how did you tackle that? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, there have definitely been situations where I'm, maybe sometimes the only one or one of a few, and you start to feel like there's an extra both responsibility and even burden, and that you can't mess up.
You feel like you're speaking for all Latinos?
Yeah. And sometimes people think of you that way too, which kind of magnifies that sense.
There's a discussion and they'll be like, so what do the Mexicans think?
Yeah. Let me consult all the Mexicans.
When I spoke at the DNC, I was the first Latino to give the keynote address at the 2012 DNC. And so much of how that's filtered is not just, this is Julián Castro giving a speech at the DNC. It's the first Latino and reaching out to Latinos and the Democratic Party, shoring up that vote. And so you feel an extra responsibility to do a good job. I think in those moments, it's important to take a step back, take a breath, and remember how supported you are by a lot of people. And also to really realize that you got there for a reason, that, you know, you have the ability, you have the work ethic, you have the talent, and that's why you're there. Also, it's okay to feel imposter syndrome because just about everybody at some point in life feels that way. If you're going to accomplish great things, you're going to go into new situations that you have not mastered, that you're not in control of. And same thing at HUD. I remember when I went over to HUD, I knew a lot of it because I had been mayor, but there was a lot that I didn't know. And I'm in rooms where I'm the secretary there, and they think, oh, well, then you know all of it.
He must know.
I was talking to somebody recently that, you know, I admire, that is older, and he was saying about this moment a week or so ago that he felt like that. And I'm like, wow, you feel like that? Like what?
Yeah.
Everybody does at different points in life. So don't let that stop you from taking a chance, from pushing forward in your career, from getting into those situations where you're blazing a trail and you know, accomplishing new things.
You know, I'm sorry, really quick. I did, I think I was listening to a podcast about this where the speaker was explaining imposter syndrome as, especially for people of color and for women, you feel that way because these spaces were not made for you and they weren't made with you in mind. Not made for women, not made for people of color. Does that mean that you don't deserve to be there? Absolutely not. You know, you made your way there, but you feel that way because it's almost by design. This is not made for you. And you have to recognize that regardless of the fact that this space is not made for you, you're still there. You made it there and you deserve to be there.
And I imagine the LGBTQ community probably is dealing a lot with that, where they may feel like, do I belong here? Do I not?
No, that's true, especially these days, where in so many ways that community, you know, is under assault. But that is when it's important to remember to believe in yourself. And sometimes that can be hard, especially in those moments. But reach as deep down as you can to believe in yourself and have that self-confidence, and then rely on those people that love you and support you in those moments. I mean, it makes a world of difference when you can talk to somebody about something and kind of get that off your chest and relieve that tension that you have, even if it's just that.
You know, I was reading this op-ed in the San Antonio Express News about a local openly gay judge that we have, and how she continuously is being attacked. She had the pride flag in her courtroom. They made her take it down. It was all kinds of issues, right? And I admire her so much because she is like, no, this is who I am, and I'm proud of it. And I remember watching you give the Democratic National Convention speech and being so proud of you. But then soon after, you start hearing the haters. Well, he doesn't speak Spanish well. Well, this, well, that. And I just remember thinking, like, who cares? You know, like, man, this is the first guy of color giving, like, I was so proud watching you up there. But I imagine that there's going to be a lot of kids that are the first, right? And they're proud, their family's proud, but they're going to have haters. You know, they may have family that is envious, or, oh, now they think they're so good because they're a lawyer. Oh, they think they're so this because of that. What advice do you give to them? How do you tune that out, right? Because I'm sure you've had a lot of haters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, today in politics, you have to have a thicker skin than ever just because of the emergence of social media. And the higher you go, the more that's true, the more intense it becomes. But as you say, in every aspect of life, you can find yourself in these situations where people are jealous, or for whatever reason, they're taking shots at you, even if it's within your own family. That's when you have to have the self-confidence and the belief in yourself to just keep going, and really to reach out for those people that do believe in you. The other part of that is that you don't need to hate people back. Right? I think the best thing that people can do is to maintain a positive attitude. Always maintain a positive attitude. And if you're optimistic and you have a positive attitude, that helps a lot. And don't pay attention to all of it. Sometimes people get really, really obsessed with one or two people that doesn't, like them, whether that's in their friends group or in politics on social media. It's a mistake to pay that much attention to what people are saying. I remember a short conversation I had with President Obama in 2015, where he said that he hadn't watched the Sunday political shows in 7 years.
Wow.
And I think he didn't expressly say it, but I think in part that was like, you know, I don't need to hear all of the intense criticism and other things. The version of that these days is Twitter and other social media. There are a lot of people who really don't pay too much attention to it. I'm still on social media, but I definitely don't pay as much attention as I used to. I used to read everything, you know, kind of, and you can't do that because after a while it gets to you.
It gets tough, yeah. I will say one pearl of wisdom that I did get from my dad over the years was
That's one.
One of many.
Yeah,
No,
a
but
lot
one.
more, I'm sure. Yeah.
No, she said one.
One of
No,
some.
just kidding.
No, but and I hear it constantly, or not constantly, but I do hear it a lot in my head. Is he always says, "Don't let other people change who you are." So don't let somebody else's actions change who you inherently are. If you're a good person and you're not mean and you're not hateful and you're not spiteful, just because somebody else is doing that, you know, doesn't mean that you have to now change who you are to match their attitude. But second to that, I had a question before we move on about the responsibility that you talked about when you are sometimes the first or a few of the first in a room as a person of color. Do you see that responsibility as necessarily a bad thing? Or could it be used as a way to encourage ourselves to work hard and do our best? Because I think, you know, the hard part is it's a reality and it is a difficult reality. I don't think we have to frame it as a negative because, you know, if we're going to have to deal with it, we should try to stay positive. And how can we use this to our advantage? Something that is made to kind of tear us down.
Yeah, if you're the first or you're one of a few, it definitely gives you an opportunity to set a great example for others coming behind you when people break new ground. And also to chip away at the stereotypes, the biases that still exist out there that sometimes hold folks back. So I see it as both of those things. You know, it's unfortunate a lot of times that still in this 21st century, people are becoming the first, whether, you know, we still have not had a woman president in the United States, and we should have done that a long time ago, like a lot of countries have. You know, I believe that that's going to happen soon, but when that happens, when that happens, it's going to be a wonderful opportunity to dispel so many of the myths that kept that from happening before.
Yeah, when a woman doesn't start a war every month, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of these, you know, you're going to have somebody, I think, that will do a great job, and that will even more open up the door of opportunity for others.
Yeah. And I had another question. Going back to, I think you have an interesting perspective that a lot of young kids today, a lot of young Latinx kids today can relate to. And it's that straddling of the Mexican culture, our heritage, and the American culture where we're growing up. Because I think a lot of times the difficulty that kids can face, and I know I've felt this, is you're not American enough for Americans, and you're also not Mexican enough for your family back in Mexico. And so you get that you don't speak Spanish and you need to speak Spanish better. And, you know, you don't know how to cook and, you know, all that stuff. But then you go to school or you go out into, you know, your whatever you're doing here in the United States, and you're still a Mexican, you know, you still have dark skin. You still, you know, have those stereotypes that are attached to you. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my mom and my grandmother were very, very good about giving us the tools to be confident in who we are and to love ourselves, essentially. And, you know, my Spanish is not great. I speak some, like a lot of folks, and understand a good amount. But culturally, I grew up in this city, in this Mexican-American community. And so I do feel connected to the Mexican and Mexican-American culture to a large extent. But yeah, I felt both of those things at different points in my life. Really more the part about feeling different when you're going into a mainstream environment. Because in San Antonio, you have so many second, third, fourth generation Hispanics, you know, that we kind of grow up in a bubble here. It feels comfortable, even if you're not great at Spanish and other things. I would just say the place that you want to get to is to love who you are. And, if you want to learn Spanish, you can learn Spanish. If you want to be in touch with other parts of the culture, you should do that. On the other side of that, we need to continue to work to break down the discrimination and bias that still exists too oftentimes against Latinos and Latinas in mainstream society. The fact is that we are very much mainstream now. I mean, basically 20% of the country is Latino or Latina. And that means that the destiny of the country is tied more than ever to the destiny of this community. So it's in everybody's interest that people be able to be themselves and, and in their own right, figure out how they straddle that.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting times, being who we are, because it's like a transition phase, right? Because we have a lot of Latinx community all over the U.S., but we don't have them yet in leadership roles. We don't have them at the presidency. We don't have them in the vice presidency. We don't have in a lot of the governors of the states and in the legislatures. So that's what's kind of exciting for kids watching this, is that this is your time. This is their time.
I mean, they're going to have so many more great
transition.
opportunities, and people are so talented out there. That is exciting. I mean, I've found that we've made so much progress as a community. At the same time, sometimes there's still an invisibility out there with regard to the Latinx community. And the only way that we're going to break that down is if you have more super talented people that are making their mark, and we continue to make progress at every level, representation at every level, in the private sector, in public office, and otherwise.
But also not ashamed, once you get there, of who you are and where you come from, right? So like I noticed in one of your profiles, I think you have your verbs as him, him, he, él.
Yeah.
Él. And I thought I love that, because that's a real subtle way of saying, I'm not ashamed of who I am. I'm not ashamed of my roots. And those was, every event I guess we go to, we have party. I'm planning this big Christmas party, and I told my staff, I'm gonna bring a banda from Mexico, and I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of who I am. And if other people don't like it, that's their problem. That's not my problem, right? But I think the first step is having the competence. And that's one of the things that Henry Cisneros told us, is he said, it's not enough to say, I'm this and I'm proud of who I am, whatever. Like, you gotta be competent. You gotta walk into the room.
I mean, you have to be well prepared.
Yeah,
definitely.
well prepared. But then once you're there and you've made it into those rooms, it's okay to be, say, you know what, can we have a mariachi for this festival? Can we have, whatever you are proud of in your culture? And if you don't want it, that's okay. That's still who you are. But if you do want it, it's okay to walk in with pride.
Yeah,
right.
That's true. My brother Joaquin was named after a poem called I Am Joaquin by Corky Gonzalez from 1969. And it's a very long poem, but part of it talks about the generation of Mexican Americans at that time having to give up their cultural identity if they wanted to make it in American society. And I think one of the blessings of living now, and especially for these younger generations, is that they don't have to do that in the same way. They can preserve who they are and be proud of their cultural identity, and also succeed educationally, economically, and make a mark on the world. You don't have to make that choice. What you do have to do, as Henry said, is you have to be as well prepared or better prepared than everybody else. You have to believe in yourself. You have to have the goods, basically.
Yeah.
But once you have that, then be who you are. Like, other people are free to be who they are.
Yeah, and I think that's a strong message for the LGBTQ community as well. You're competent, you're smart, you get in that room, be who you are, regardless of what people say or think. Be who you are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good message. And I also wanted to ask, you had mentioned earlier about self-confidence and being sure of yourself, and this is in reference to imposter syndrome. And I know that I have experienced that in the past before I had heard this podcast and kind of reframed the way that I see it. But for me, the hardest part was, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do. How do I do it? How do I be self-confident? Because I think you can always be your worst critic. You really can. And all of these achievements that you might have, there's always a way of undermining yourself. Have you ever experienced that? And how were you able to overcome that if you did?
Yeah, I mean, like anybody, I think there are moments when I've experienced doubt and, really wondering whether I could do something. And when I have those moments, the way that I've handled it is just to try and take the chance.
Okay.
To try and make that my default, right? To make that leap, and again, and to remember that like I have value and I have something to add to the conversation, and that I belong. And it really does help to have that support system of people who believe in you to help you,
Yeah, that's true.
get to that place.
I think also what's important is those people, it's important to make sure that you're not surrounding yourself with yes men. They're not always going to be telling you whatever you want to hear. But that way also when they're telling you, hey, you deserve to be there. Like you worked hard and you're smart and you're intelligent and you know, all of these things, you can believe them because you know that they're not going to be lying to you,
That's true.
And so if you're lying to yourself and undermining yourself, well, at least you have these people surrounding you that you know are not going to be lying to you.
Who are your mentors? Like, I know you've had access to, you know how they say, if you could have dinner with anybody, for me, it would be Obama, right? And so like, you've had access to people that so many people look up to. Any pearls of wisdom, people that you've looked up to that they've shared with you?
Oh yeah, I mean there are a number of people that I looked up to. Henry Cisneros was one of the people that I looked up to when I was thinking about getting into politics. I mean, I think that one of the reasons that I decided to go into city politics, city public service, was that Henry had sort of glamorized the idea that you could make a big difference through urban politics when I was growing up in the 1980s. And I mean, he did that. He did it effectively. And I say glamorized because he also had like blazed this trail. He had been interviewed for the vice presidency himself by Walter Mondale in 1984. He had gone on and become a HUD secretary under Bill Clinton. A lot of people wanted him to run for governor or senator. He had the chance to become senator at one point in the early 1990s when Ann Richards was governor and was going to make an appointment. And more than anything else was just this super talented guy. I tell people oftentimes that if you took the Henry of 1981 and put him into the presidential race of 2024, the guy would be a very, very sharp, serious contender. I mean, he had that kind of talent, has it still.
Yeah.
And so seeing that made me believe, oh, well, somebody like that, somebody that looks like me, somebody that came from the west side of San Antonio can do these things. Maybe I can do these things too.
And I love that because you kind of have followed his trajectory from city council, mayor, HUD secretary. But the message, I guess, is that you've taken it even one step further. You ran for president. And that takes guts, right? And so,
well, Henry might have become president. He would have probably done better than I did in the race.
But he never ran.
He did not.
And you did. And I think, a lot of kids think, well, my parents came as immigrants. They work hard. They do this. That's great. They've done great. Now it's your job to take it one step further. And you kind of were on shoulders of people that are amazing, like Henry Cisneros.
I feel like I was able to take what my mother and grandmother gave me, a foundation, and then what I saw out there as possible with people like Henry. Also, I mentioned Luis Fraga, my professor at Stanford earlier, and to benefit from living in a better time for our community than they had the chance to. I mean, it wasn't as possible then for my mom or for Henry or for others to go as high as we would want to go. And my hope is that, it's going to be even more possible, more likely that my kids and, these next generations are able to go even higher with less obstacles than even I had or Joaquin had.
You call the American dream in your book, or I'm not sure if it's the American dream or our immigrant version of the American dream, but a relay race. And it's the generations before you working hard to get you where you are, and then you work hard to get the future generations, further than you are. And I think that you were saying it in relation to how hard your grandmother worked and everything that she did and where it got your mother, and then everything that she did and where it got you and your brother. But I think that's important to think of as a community, even as you're referencing Mr. Cisneros and what he did, and then how it inspired you when you went this step further. And also you were city council younger than he was.
Yes.
You broke that record.
1 year younger, right?
1 year
Yeah.
younger.
You were 26, he was at 27.
That's right.
Your competitive streak.
I mean,
Had to beat him.
Yeah. Well, he's got a lot more money now than I do, so I think he's beating me in that regard. I think that that's true for the community as well. When you think about, things like more business owners in our community, more elected officials in this generation, more people who are just living in stable, good environments in our community. And so I take your point about the entire community getting stronger and stronger. And, that has to do, I think, with the everything to do with the community and also with our country that has become a fairer, more just country where you can get further. We still have a ways to go. Yes. We can't pretend like it's all, well and good, but it's definitely better than it was for my mom's generation, certainly for my grandmother's generation.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important message to remember, because a lot of times it is framed as, okay, we've done it. Women have rights. We can vote. And, people of color, we can vote now. We can run for office. But we're not operating in this space where there is no progress to be made. There is still progress to be made, and not only by ourselves, but by our future generations. So
Absolutely.
I think what we can do is work towards that progress in our own right, but also work towards building a foundation for our future generations.
And kind of on that, right? We're this is kind of a Latin-based or Latinx-based mentorship program, but two of the biggest mentors in my life were two Anglo men.
Mm-hmm.
The two law partners that I went to work with at the beginning of my law career, a Jewish man and a white guy from Oklahoma, and they became some of my best friends, great mentors, taught me a lot. You worked under President Obama, African-American man, a black man, I assume was very influential on you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you find them where you can, right?
Exactly. I mean, just because somebody is of a different background from you, that doesn't mean that they won't be overjoyed with your success and reach out and give. I mean, I'm very grateful to President Obama for the opportunity that he gave me, and also grateful for people along the way. Whether they were white or Latino or Latina, for the opportunities that they gave Joaquin and me. I remember when we were teenagers, there was a guy named Larry Hart who had been a World War II veteran, and he was older, and he was a tennis instructor. He had been a professional tennis player, but he used to give free lessons out at Jefferson High School at the courts. And, he kind of took us under his wing and gave us these free tennis lessons. And we ended up playing for Jefferson, and then didn't play, obviously professionally or anything, but it became something that we did our whole lives. And, but he was willing to spend the time and to teach us and to be kind of a stable part of our lives during those couple of years. He wasn't like us. He was a lot older. He was white and we were Latino. He was from a different place and a different part of his point in his life. People, don't write people out of your life just because they look different from you or
different gender.
Yeah, I mean, different gender, or just different background in general. Because really, at the end of the day, it's a lot of people, no matter what color they are or orientation or whatever, they have a good heart and a willingness to help. And so find those people in your life.
Yeah, that's a very good message, I think.
Did you have a lot of access to Obama?
Yes.
Some. I mean, there were a lot of people that had a lot more. But, I think that one of the reasons that I took that job as HUD secretary was because of the president, knowing that President Obama was this once in a lifetime historic president. And I knew that it would be something else to be able to tell my grandkids one day that I served in President Obama's.
Yeah.
And y'all were best friends.
No.
He was getting really lavish it, we used to play tennis all the time.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's
yes.
great.
I did also want to ask, when we're talking about mentorship, a lot of times in this podcast, especially, we mention professional mentors. But Can you name any mentors that you had, or maybe not name, but kind of explain the importance of having mentors in other areas of your life? Did you have mentors that, taught you the value of how you're going to raise your kids, or possibly, just anything outside of your professional life?
Yeah, I mean, I've run into folks, especially becoming a parent, and asking different people about parenting, also just kind of at different moments in life, how to handle situations that I came upon. I can't say that there's been somebody in that regard, other than my mother and my parents, that were consistently like a mentor. But I've kind of found people at those different moments when I needed help, needed advice, and people have been willing to share with me. And I think, and my advice to people would be, don't be shy about asking for help and asking for advice on different situations. Oftentimes, people will welcome the opportunity to share what they know. And I feel this even more. I tell kids when I speak to kids that are in high school or in college, like, you're making me feel old. And I'm starting to get the feeling that I think, I could see in older people when I was 15 years old or 20 years old. Like, you want to give any kind of wisdom that you have to hopefully help others. So find those folks.
Mm-hmm. That is something that I have learned myself firsthand. Is you would be surprised how many people are really, happy to help and really want to help you, and happy when you're asking them for help.
What would you say? And we're gonna try to wrap up here soon because we've been going, But I always tell young kids, you should have at least a 5-year plan, right? 5 to 10 year plan, more or less. I imagine getting on city council didn't just one day out of the blue, but they want to run for city council. They want to run for mayor. I imagine you kind of had a plan. Am I wrong in that?
Yeah, I mean, I had a passion and I knew what I wanted to aim for. And by the time I was in my first year of law school, I had a sense that I wanted to come back home and run for city council. And because of term limits at the time, that there would be an opening in 2001. And so my advice would be and you hear this all the time, but I think it's true. I mean, do what you're passionate about, because that's what's going to drive you. It's what's going to interest you. Keep your interest and help you excel. And for me, that was public service. And you have to be thinking ahead. It's not enough to just think about next week or next month or even next year, whether it's 5 years, 10 years. And look, things aren't always going to go the way you think they will in the plan. I mean,
You
life
thought you would be president by now, right?
Yeah, I know, that's true. And frankly, like, life would be boring if everything always went according to plan, right?
You'd never learn.
Yeah, you wouldn't learn. But you'll find that if you think that way, if you try and map out your future, that you're a lot more likely to get the kind of future that you want than if you don't. And so that, especially early in my career, that certainly applied to me.
Right.
I did also want to ask you, reminded me, but speaking about being ahead, I think were mentioned in your book that you had stayed 2 weeks ahead when you started at Stanford because of the heavy workload, and you were worried about not being able to keep up, especially because you're kind of stepping into this world that is so prestigious, and you do have to work hard. But sometimes it can seem like the people that came before you were like superstars. I don't know how I could ever, work as hard as this person, do as much as this person. The workload that they had is just impossible for me. How did you do it? You had a heavy workload, both at Stanford and at Harvard, and you still managed to, you and your brother had run for, I think, Student Senate at Stanford, and then you started EPALs at Harvard. You're still managing to do all these other things. How?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be good about your time and, time management, and then also, find that passion. For me, like, when we were volunteering with EPALs for basically students at Fox Tech, it was that I wanted to help create more opportunity for people who came from where I came from on the west side of San Antonio. And this was a program that was trying to link the Fox Tech magnet law program with Harvard law students and get them, through email, back then. Basically pen pals, for lack of a better term, that could give them advice and mentorship. But my advice would be, to think about how you're using your time and find those things that are going to drive you. I think a lot in my life, the situations where I feel like I haven't done as well have been where I really wasn't motivated on the subject matter. And so, like when I got home and I was practicing law, this defense law, I knew that I wasn't going to spend my life billing 2,000 hours a year, and I didn't like that environment. It wasn't what motivated me. And so it really wasn't a hard choice to sort of put that aside and mostly put my time into public service. For other people, they like different things, and that is what they want to do. Just find what you want to do.
Okay, that's good advice.
So to wrap up, you came from very humble beginnings. You go to Stanford undergrad, Harvard Law School, San Antonio City Council, San Antonio Mayor, Secretary, HUD Secretary. But you give the keynote address, the Democratic National Convention. Now you're kind of known. You run for president. You're known at a national level. Through that life you've had, obviously you've picked up some kernels of wisdom. What would you leave? Maybe somebody, a 17-year-old kid that is coming from humble beginnings, but is very smart and they don't have the resources, they don't have maybe mentor, somebody to talk to like yourself. What kind of advice would you give them as they go through life and plan out their life?
Believe in yourself, love yourself. Find people who love and support you and stay close to them. Realize that we often psych ourselves out about the next level in life. The next level in life is never as hard as you psych yourself out about. When I was in high school, they taught me that I would have to study 3 hours for every 1 credit hour in college. Nobody studied 3 hours for every 1 credit hour in college. And they told me law school was so competitive that people would tear pages out of books so that their classmates couldn't do the work and do as well. Law school was harder than college, but it wasn't so hard that it was impossible to do. And then before I went to go work at a law firm, they said that life was so terrible that you wouldn't have any time for anything else other than just practicing law. And yeah, it was busy, but it wasn't so busy that it was impossible. You are where you are for a reason. And so believe in yourself and keep on doing what has made you successful at the next level in life. Keep doing that. And finally, if you don't understand something or you need help, don't be afraid to ask for it. Don't be afraid to ask a question. Oftentimes people spiral down because they don't ask for help or they don't ask a question. Don't do that. Ask for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We really appreciate your time. And I'm sure there's a lot of kids here that are going to be very, very excited about listening to this podcast because we have somebody that is known on a national level, that has had a lot of success and some failures and is still here. And we all look forward to the next 10, 20 years of Julián Castro and his brother.
Yes.
Thank you.
For more content, please like and subscribe and follow us on all social media platforms at Latinx Mentor.